So I've had a few people ask me how I make all the details on some of the models that I made on my YouTube channel, and I figured the best way to answer this question is to just show you exactly how I do it and walk you through everything. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this video. So I'm going to show you how I made some of the details. And in this video, we're going to be specifically focusing on this little cap here, the headlights in the front, these viewports for the driver, and some other details in the back like this container right here. Now, I'm going to spend the first part of this video focusing on the hole for the turret, but I'm going to put time tags so you can just skip through any part of the video and go to the part that you want to see. And we're going to start off by making this hole for the turret here, or the socket perhaps. And then we're also going to focus on this sort of connector between the hull and the hole for the turret. Right? You can see this kind of like an angled edge. It's an interesting shape. It's a bit tricky to get perfectly, so I'm going to put my hole in the middle there, and I'm going to try to connect this so it looks the way it should, right? Now, first I have to find the center of the tank where the hole is going to be made. And for the hole, I'm just going to use a boolean. I'm going to have a circle, which I'm going to turn into a cylinder, and then I'm going to use that cylinder to cut a hole in the body of the tank, and that's pretty much all there is to it. So I'm going to add in a circle with about 32 vertices. It doesn't have to be more than that. This isn't a very visible part of the tank, so it doesn't matter too much if it's not very detailed, okay? And I'm going to scale my circle down to what I think the size should be according to the blueprint. Well, I can't see the hole in the blueprint, but I can see in this picture here approximately what it should be. Now, I also want to scale my circle so it crosses this sort of intersection between these two or these three edges here. So that when I add in my boolean, things are going to be a little bit more simple. It's not going to be a little ridiculously small face there in between. I just want to make it perfect, so it's a nice cut there. And then of course I just extrude it down so to make the cut in the body of the tank. Now, one detail we have to be careful about here is the side of the tank. You can see over here on the side, there's no circular or round shape sticking out, which means that the socket for the turret does not go beyond the hull of the tank. It doesn't go beyond the main body. So we know approximately how wide it shouldn't be, but we can see that the top of the hole, the sort of cut, the frame for the hole, it's a little bit wider than the body of the tank, right? So this means that, okay, our frame is pretty wide, but the hole itself, where the turret is fitted, it's a bit narrower. And that means, okay, we have to separate those two things, right? Okay, so we have to extrude this circle inwards so that it is narrower than the body of the tank, right? Well, not narrower, but so that the circle fits inside the main body of the tank without these armor panels on the side. Which means that we can see that from top view in my wireframe, it should be about that size, and that way when we extrude it downwards, it's not going to clip through the sides of the tank. Okay, I'm going to move this object up here, and I'm going to separate it so it creates a new object. There has to be a separation between the object that we use to cut the hole in the tank with the boolean and the frame for the hole, right? Those are two separate things. And so I'm going to use this very simple cylinder, which I'm only going to use to cut the hole. The hole is literally just going to be a cylinder cut into the tank, nothing else, no more detail to that. And well, now I found the diameter of the circle, okay? And I'm just going to rename that. I'm going to rename it to something like cut again. And then if I go ahead and add in my boolean modifier and I apply it, I just delete this the cylinder here, and you can see I have a pretty good cut here. And now I'm just going to take my time to fix up some of these vertices here just to make it a little bit less messy. These are all flat surfaces, so it's not really too much of a problem, but I don't want to have too many unnecessary vertices lying around, so I'm going to get rid of them wherever I can. And now we can go back to our frame, which is above here, and we can select everything and move it back down to where it should be. And then we can just extrude this circle again and make it so that the frame goes into the hole, right? And now it doesn't matter what's in between. This is perfectly well fitting. And of course, I go ahead and add some bevels because I mean, can't have any final model without proper bevels, right? So these bevels I think are good enough. Doesn't really matter too much again because they're not really visible at all. And then now we get to the tricky part here, and that's this sort of I won't really call it a bevel, but it's kind of this angled face, or rounded sort of. It's this shape that connects the hull of the tank to this socket for the turret, right? It's a bit of a tricky shape, and it took me a bit of time to understand how it really works, but I'm going to show you how I did it in the end. So I'm just going to select the top of my entire socket here, and all these faces at the top, and these edge loops, and I'm just going to move them down a little bit so that they line up with the hull of the tank. So let's add up a couple of loop cuts here on the side, just so we can connect the socket with this vertex right here, right? So it sort of makes a little bit more sense topologically speaking. And we're going to use a slide tool just to sort of shift them into place and so that they line up with the vertex. And that way, when we select everything, we can press Shift W, or we can just remove the double vertices, right? Or as it is now called, it's simply merging vertices by distance. Before, you used to be able to remove double vertices, which meant that at a certain proximity, Blender would recognize when two vertices are meant to be in the same place, right? So you remove the double vertices, it means that it turns them into one vertex, right? It joins them together into one. which is now called merging vertices by distance. So now you can set how you can set a threshold for how close the vertices have to be in order for you to merge them together, which is interesting, but usually it doesn't make much of a difference. So I'm going to go ahead and delete some of my unnecessary faces and edges here in between. I'm going to delete those real quick, and then we can get into the hard part, right? I'm going to place my vertex, my 3D cursor here on this edge here, and I have to start tracing. Well, I can't really trace it, but I have to do something about this weird shape here, okay? And how am I going to do that? Well, first of all, we need to take a new vertex, which we're going to collapse into the middle of this edge here where my 3D cursor is, right? So we have a vertex which is right on this sort of inclined or declined, perhaps, surface in front of the tank, right? And I'm going to place my 3D cursor again at a lower point in this edge because it's a perfectly straight edge all the way down. It's a perfectly straight face. And I can use that 3D cursor there to scale the point upwards so that it sort of slides up or down this inclined surface, right? And then according to my blueprint, I just lined it up to where the top of this connecting part should be, right, approximately. I can't really see it because there's another hole there, but approximately. And then I place my 3D cursor in another place, and I extrude this to the side, right? I extrude the vertex to the side, and this is pretty straightforward because it only moves in one direction. It doesn't have to go in any fancy angle, right? And then I place my 3D cursor down at the bottom again so I can scale it away and move it up again the same way I did with the first vertex, right? I move it a little bit higher on the hull of the tank, right? And I'm going to go ahead and add in another mirror modifier here, just so I don't have to do everything twice, because it's a bit of a pain to do all that. And of course, I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to extrude it upwards a little bit. Now, why do I do that? Well, the main reason is because I need a bevel at the bottom here, at the tip of this sort of triangle that you see right now. And, well, I can't do a bevel if I only have an infinitely thin shape, right? So I need to extrude it. I separate the object, of course, and then I add a bevel to this new edge that I created here. And now I can use this bevel to, I have multiple vertices which I can now connect with the circle that I have on my socket there, right? Now you can see that if I zoom in on the side here, it's perfectly aligned with the rest of the tank here. Now I just need to make sure that I have the right amount of edges and vertices so that I can connect these two shapes, right? So let's make sure that we have some more vertices. Let's connect those, and now those connect perfectly. And now we can move on to some of the smaller details on our tank. And we're going to start off by modeling this here little cap, which is located on the front part of the tank. Now, we have to make sure this is lined up perfectly with the front of the tank, and we can do so by selecting a face here, like this face right there, and pressing Shift 7 on the numpad, right? And that aligns our view with that face perfectly. So when we create a new circle, and we go down here and we select Align with View, then that circle is going to have the exact same angle, or tilt, or whatever you want to call it, as the front panel of the tank, right? So it's going to be perfectly placed there. And then we're just going to scale it down so that it's about the right size as it should be. So I'm going to place my 3D cursor down there at the bottom, and I'm going to scale the circle up from the 3D cursor just to bring it a little bit higher so that it aligns with the blueprint, and which means that it's going to be about there. And I'm also going to scale it down a bit, and then it's pretty simple. I just extrude the face, then I'm going to duplicate this face, I'm going to scale it down and extrude it again, and then I'm going to just work with some bevels again just to make it a little bit smoother. And I'm also going to add a bevel here at the bottom. So then I'm going to take this face here at the top. I'm also going to extrude it once again, and then I'm going to extrude it inwards to make this little dent, to make this little, I won't say dent, but it's a little hole in the cap. And of course some more bevels. Now I kind of overkilled it with the bevels here, I think. I added a little bit too many. It's not really necessary to have this many, but okay, it's not a big problem. The amount of vertices I had in the end was not too large, so I think it was perfectly fine. And we're also going to focus on these little hinges, I'll say, in the back of this little cap. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take some vertices here from the sides, or from this circle here, and then I'm just going to duplicate them and work and model the hinges out of those, okay? So I'll select this vertex here, and I'll extrude it out on the Y and the Z axis, right, not the X axis. So this way it just goes up and away from the center of the circle. And then I have this new edge here that I can separate as a new object, and I'll just move it to the side a little bit. And now I'm just going to use that to model one of the hinges, right? So I'll extrude it to the side, and then I'll extrude it downwards into the base of the tank. And I'll do the same with this part here, just so it clips through the rest of this little object. So I'm going to push this edge here, I'm going to push it downwards a little bit, and I'm going to add a bevel to these edges here. And I'm also going to add some bevels to the corners. Now I'm going to select everything and separate it into a new object, just so it's a little bit easier to work with. But I'm going to make sure that these two items, these two meshes are in the same object. And then I'm going to make this little piece that connects the two hinges, right? So I'm going to select some vertices here in the middle, and then I'm going to add in a circle, which I'm going to scale down. I'm going to give it about 8 vertices because it's practically invisible. That's how small it is. I'm going to scale it down quite significantly and bring it to the point where I think it should be placed. And I'll just extrude it outward so that it connects at 2 hinges. And let's also add some thickness just so it looks a little bit more natural there. And then we're going to get rid of the extra faces and the loop cuts that we don't need here. So now I'm going to do the same thing in the front, but there's a slight difference in the shape. So my idea was that I'm going to take a few edges at the top here, or at the bottom maybe, and I'm going to extrude them out from the center of the circle. Now, I made a little mistake here because I extruded them out on the X and the Y axis, which means that they stayed perfectly flat. So it didn't make much sense to make it this way. It would have made more sense if I extruded them out on the Y and the Z axis, because then they would follow the same direction as the slope at the front of the tank, right? But anyway, I took the edges in the front here and I scaled them also to 0 on the Y and the Z axis with the 3D cursor there, just to make a perfectly straight line there. And then if I extrude that line downwards, I have a flat face in front, and then I can get rid of these faces on top here, which are currently a little bit deformed, right? And then I can fix up this shape by just scaling the other vertices in the same way, right? So we have a perfectly flat face there as well. Now, I didn't like how this really turned out. I thought it could have been done a little bit better, but it's such a small detail that it really doesn't matter at all. So again, we're going to add some bevels just to touch it up a little bit, and that's pretty much all there is to it. We have this simple shape right here in the front, which we're also going to connect to the rest of the object here. So I'm just going to parent some of the objects to the main body of the tank here. I'm going to parent the skirts to the side armor above the tracks. I'm going to parent the side armor above the tracks to the main body of the tank, and I'm also going to parent some of the other smaller details onto the main body of the tank. So that way, when I pull the main body of the tank, it's going to pull all the other parts with it as well. And now it's time that I fix up some of these bevels here. And I'm going to take the faces on this last panel of the skirt here. I'm going to delete some of those. And now I can just take the edges and I can add some pretty big bevels to them. So I'm going to go over to side view and I'm going to add a bevel. And I'm going to make sure it has enough edges just so it looks smooth enough. And I think, okay, it doesn't have to be too accurate again. I think something like that will do it. And I'm also going to add another bevel here at the bottom, which is going to go all the way to the end, about like so. And then I'm also going to get rid of these extra edges and vertices here. And then I can just fill in the face and add some more vertices and add some more bevels to the corners of the side skirt panels, right? So I'm going to go ahead and select all of these little edges, and then I'm going to add a bevel to all of them at the same time, just so I can make sure that the bevel is exactly the same on all of them. Now, I mentioned before that I wasn't too happy with how my headlights turned out. Or not the headlights, but these sort of dented parts where the headlights should sit on the tank. And I said that I'm going to redo them after, which is exactly what I'm going to do right now. So I'm going to fill in these gaps here. I'm going to delete the faces I have below and fill in the gaps so that so that there's no dent at all. And I'm also going to get rid of these loop cuts, which I used to create that little cut part. Now, before I can continue, I noticed that the hole that I cut for the turret of the tank, it was the same mesh as the main hull of the tank, right? So I can't really manipulate the vertices too much without messing up something else. So I chose that it would be a better way to just separate this into a new object. And that way I can just move it out of the way and work with the rest of my tank a little bit more easily. So I'm going to take all these loop cuts and I'm going to slide them all the way to the end so that I can get rid of them. And I made 3 loop cuts, so I'm going to just do that 3 times here. And I have a few extra vertices here in between which I have to get rid of, so I have to be careful about those. And now I'm finally going to go ahead and use a boolean to cut in this little hole that is going to hold the headlights. So I'm going to create a new plane. I'm going to line it with my view again the same way I did it with this other little detail I made before. And I'm going to bring the plane down to the bottom. So I'm just going to scale it down, and then I'm going to scale down towards the 3D cursor. And then when I bring it there, I'm going to scale it up just so it can have the right size. So I'm going to bring it as close as I can there, and I'm going to scale it up quite a bit so that I think it's about the right size as the hole should be. And then I'll just take the sides of the plane and I'll line them up with some of these edges here. So now if I separate this into a new object and I extrude it up and also extrude it down a bit, then it's going to be ready so I can use it as a boolean. Okay, so I extrude this down so that it sort of cuts into the body of the tank. It's going to clip with it. And I'm also going to push this face on the side a little bit further just so it sticks out of the tank, right? And then, of course, I'm going to go ahead and add some more bevels. So I'm going to add a bevel in the corner here and also a few bevels at the bottom. And let's make the bevels about this wide with, what's that, 3 or 4 cuts. 3 or 4 edges, rather. And I'm just going to rename this object into something like cut again so that I can recognize it in my boolean modifier. And then we just do that. We go ahead and add any boolean modifier. we make sure that everything lines up, and we can go ahead and choose our object now. So let's look for this new object. Let's select the cut here, and it looks about right. So let's apply that boolean, and okay, we applied something else here. We made a bit of a mistake. Let's apply this boolean here and delete this object, and now we can have we have this perfect hole there, but we have some clipping in his face here. So we need to fix that up. We're just going to delete this whole face, and we're going to fill it in with a new face. Now we're not going to fill it all the way to the end there. That's what caused the problem. So we're going to bring this vertex up to the other vertex, and then fill the face in separately. Now the edges here might still be a little bit messy in this part in the middle here, between the hole and the rest of the body, but anyway, it's not something that's giving me any trouble afterwards, so I'm just going to leave that as is now. And now I deleted this whole side again because I want to redo my mirror modifier because I applied it by accident. So I'm going to half everything, and then I'm going to go ahead and add a new mirror modifier here. Now in this part I just modeled this little piece of metal on the side of the headlight here, and I think this is supposed to be like a tow hook or something. But anyway, it was a pretty tricky piece to model, but it was nothing that interesting, so I decided to speed it up a little bit because it's mostly just hand modeling. You can see that I added a circle, and then I used that circle to extrude some more vertices, which I traced the blueprint with. And then with some other tools, like maybe some proportional editing and some loop tools to even out the spaces, I use those tools just to make it a little bit smoother and rounder. But that's really all there is to it. After I smoothed out the shape, I just filled in the edges, as you can see here. And I also used some bevels just to make some parts a little bit smoother. So after I filled in the faces here, I added in a circle, which I used to cut in the hole. Right, I added a circle, made it into a cylinder, and then with another boolean modifier, I made that little circle, a little hole in the piece where the tow hook is supposed to go, I guess. And after that was done, of course, I finished it off with some more bevels just to make it a little bit nicer, and that's really all that there is to it. And now I'm going to show you how I created the actual headlights, which you can see in this picture here. And the first thing I did is I added in a circle with about 32 vertices in it. I wanted the circle to be smooth enough because this is a slightly bigger object, so if it was like 16 vertices, you might see that it's not very smooth. And we're just going to scale it up to roughly the size of what it should be, I think, according to the blueprint. The blueprint is pretty blurry at this point, so you can't see it very well, but you can still see sort of roughly what the shape is. So that's what I'm going to follow. And I'm just going to bring the circle up into place here, like so. And I'm going to fill that circle in, and I'm going to extrude it backwards a little bit. And now if I go to front view, I'm going to select some faces here at the bottom, like this, and then I'm going to extrude them downwards. Now if you look at the picture here, you can see that the headlight has like 4 little pieces sticking out, where some screws are located or something like that, and this is what's holding the headlight to the body of the tank or something like that anyway. And I'm going to delete the faces on the sides here, like the circle and the newly extruded faces, but I'm going to keep the outline, and I'm going to reshape that outline so that it's a bit smoother and it looks a little bit more round. And then I get something like this. And then I'm going to use my loop tools here. I'm going to select these loops here, and I'm just going to use my loop tools to even out the spaces and to relax the loops a little bit so that it's a little bit smoother, right? And you can turn on your loop tools in your system preferences. You just go to add-ons, and it's already there. You just have to click it. It's a very useful tool. And now this is roughly the shape that I need. So if I just select this shape now, and I place my 3D cursor in the middle of my circle, right? I can select this. I can rotate it by 90 degrees, and then 90 degrees again and again. So I have 4 instances of the exact same thing here. And now you can see that it looks pretty much like it should. It fits into place. So if I just fill in the faces here, I can sort of get this shape that I wanted. Now the other thing I have to do is rotate this by about 45 degrees on the y-axis. And that way they're also turned the right way. You can see that there's 2 at the bottom, 2 at the top, right? And it looks something like it should. I think they're a little bit too big, maybe, but it doesn't matter too much. And then I can create another circle, which I'm going to scale, and I'm going to place it at the back of this frame for the headlight, let's say. I'll place it there, and I'll make it just a little bit smaller than my circle from before. And in this new circle, once again, it's going to get extruded outwards, but the back part is going to be scaled down a little bit just so it has a sort of bevel shape to it, let's say. But I'm going to add some more bevels here, of course, because otherwise it wouldn't look smooth enough. And some more bevels in the back there. Now, once again, I don't know if this is actually what the headlight looks like in the back. I can't really see it. But this is just how I feel it would make sense. So you can play around with this. If you feel like it should look like something else, you can feel free to make it whatever way you like. But anyway, I'm going to take the side now, and I'm going to flatten it. You can see that there's like a separate part sticking out here. So I'm going to flatten this face, and I'm going to use that to extrude this part that I'm talking about, right? So I get a flat face, and I can just extrude that out about that far. And then if I scale it down on the z-axis, it also gets that sort of a triangular shape, let's say. And now if I go ahead and add some bevels again, it's pretty much what I need it to be. And now again, I'm going to use my loop tools just to even out the spaces here and relax them a little bit. And now I'm also going to add in another cube, which I'm going to use with a boolean again to make this other little dent that you see there. It's like a little cut, which is sort of another part of the light maybe. I don't know what that part should be on the tank. But anyway, it's a little hole there, which I feel like was an interesting little detail. So I'm going to add a new cube. I'm going to stretch it out and add some bevels at the back. And now if I select this cube, I separate it into a new object. I'm once again going to rename it so I can add in my boolean, and it's going to make that little cut that I want there. Now before I applied my boolean, I decided to change the shape of this little part sticking out a little bit. And then I place my object in the middle of it again, so then I can just apply my boolean and I get the nice little cut there. Now the next thing we want to do is the glass part where the light bulb is located on the inside, right? So I'm going to add a new circle for that, which I'm going to scale down to about the size that it should be again, which is going to be a little bit smaller than the circle we made before, but not too much smaller, right? Something like, what's that, maybe 0.6 times the size. And I'm going to extrude that out and just, I'll use this as another boolean to cut in the hole, right? Because I think it's a little bit pulled inside, and then that's where the glass is located, right? So I renamed this to A cut. I put an A at the start of the name just so I can recognize it, just so it comes up at the top of the list of objects when I go to my boolean modifier, right? So if I go to my objects here, it's organized alphabetically, so the ones with an A in the name are going to come up first. And that way I don't have to scroll all the way down through all these different objects. And I can just apply this, maybe add some more bevels here. Again, this is just really small details. You don't have to be so careful about all this, but I like to do it. And now I have my headlight sorted out there. Now I just ripped some of the faces here so I get sharper edges, and then I just added some smooth shading so that it looks a little bit nicer. And the next part we're going to do is this little metal bar that goes above and over the headlight. And I guess that's the part that's really holding the headlight in place. But anyway, I'm going to make a little plane here, a little square, and I'm going to bring it to some part in front of the headlight there. You can see that it goes in front of the headlight in the picture here, so I have to move the headlight backwards a little bit. And I'm going to lift it up just so it doesn't clip through the bottom of the tank here. Now this new face here, I'm going to pull it down, and then I'm going to extrude it up so that it sticks out of the tank. And I'm just going to scale it up a little bit. Then I'm going to extrude the square again and add in, I'm just going to scale the new extruded face down just so it looks like there's a bit of a bevel there. And then I'm just going to extrude it again and just do some hand modeling until I get to the shape that I want to get, right? Now, of course, we always need some bevels, so let's add some of those to the edges as well. Now I duplicate this face on top and I scale it up a bit, and this is the bar that goes over the headlight, right? So extrude this up a little, and I'm going to get rid of these faces on the sides here, and just so I get a flat surface over there, right? You delete these vertices, and then I'm going to fill in what I have left over there. It's like the shape is cut, and then I can just extrude another flat face out of it. So I'm going to extrude it a little bit just so this part kind of sticks out, and this is where the bar gets a little bit thicker, let's say. And you can see that there's some bevels at the top there. So I'm going to scale these down a little bit on the y-axis, and then I'm just going to add some bevels there. And now we can just select these two faces and extrude them out on the x-axis. Before I do that, I decided I'm going to lift this part up a little bit just to make it a little bit thicker, right? And then I can take the face on top and I can extrude it out again. And now this should go across all the way to the other side, and it should connect at some point with the shape that we made here a little bit earlier, right? So just make sure that everything lines up correctly. Let's move this backwards just a little bit. Now I thought that, I figured that this bar should go right into this little dent in the metal piece we made before, out of the circles, right? It should go in the part between the two circles, let's say, and that's where it should be screwed onto the shape. So that means that I have to pull my headlight backwards a little bit so it's still behind the bar, right? And I also have to reshape the back of the headlight so that it doesn't clip through the body of the tank. And now since this needs to be symmetrical on both sides, this bar that goes over, I'm going to make a loop cut in the middle of the bar, and then I'm going to delete one side so that I can just duplicate the other side and bring it across the 3D cursor, right? So that way it's going to be identical on both sides. and we can get rid of this loop cut here. And now with just a few more minor adjustments, we can make sure that there's no clipping here, and then it's going to look right the way we want it to, right? We're gonna be able to screw it right on top of the shape here. So we're gonna just pull this little face down a bit, just so it goes, just so it's on top of this object. And I think that's the shape we're looking for, more or less. I'm gonna pull this up a little bit so there's no clipping there. And let's see, let's make sure everything's in place here. And of course, we're gonna separate the object and do a new one. And we're gonna parent it to this metal piece because it's screwed to this part, so they should be joined together. And then some smooth shading and an edge split modifier just to make things a little bit nicer. Let's move on to another interesting detail here, which I always find rather fun to make. And that's going to be this little hatch with some, I'll say, viewports, where I think the driver is located, right? So this little, you see this hole in the body of the tank is cut here in the picture on the left side. And I'm going to make that hole, and I'm also going to make some little windows that the driver looks through. Now, the method that I'm going to use to make this you might find rather unconventional, but I think it worked out pretty well, so I'm going to show you how I did it. And as you can see, I made it in a plane, and then I just turned it into a triangle. You can also just create a circle with 3 vertices. It doesn't make any difference at all. And then I extrude the circle so that I can add some bevels to the corners, right? Make sure you fix your normals when you do this. Then I select the edges, and I add in a pretty large bevel, as you can see here. And this makes it a sort of rounded triangle, let's say. And I just wanted it to be somewhat similar to the shape that we have in the picture, right? It doesn't have to be too exact. It really doesn't matter too much. The back part of this object is not even that visible because we're going to have the turret covering it. So as long as it's somewhat along the same shape, it's going to be just fine. But I figured I'll make 2 large bevels and then another smaller bevel in one of the corners. You can see in the picture, one of the corners is a little bit more sharp than the others. And now I have this thick extruded rounded triangle. Let's say, I don't know how else I might refer to this shape. And you can see that this has the same outline, or the same perimeter maybe, as this kind of hatch that we have there. Now basically this is going to be the platform on top of which the viewports are going to be lying. Now I'm going to push this down into the body of the tank a little bit. And it seems that we have some clipping, so let's push it forward a little bit. Now here's the interesting part about what I'm about to do. I'm going to duplicate the main body of the tank, and I'm going to take this whole object that I just made a little bit above. Now I duplicated this because I don't want to mess with the main body of the tank, so this is just going to be a separate object just for this modeling purpose. And what I'm going to do with it is I'm going to add in a Boolean modifier. Now I'm not going to use the Boolean to cut in the hole inside the body of the tank, but I'm going to cut the object that I made using the body of the tank, which means that I'm going to add the Boolean to the object that I made, and then the Boolean object inside the modifier is going to be the body of the tank. If I select the body of the tank as my object there, and I apply the Boolean, you can see that now this shape is cut at the bottom, right, so that it fits with the body of the tank, right? It has the same angle. So I'm just going to take this shape, I'm going to bring it back down and extrude it up a little bit. And now we have the frame for our little viewports there. So I'm going to push this frame up the tank a little bit because it has to be a little bit further up. But I'm not going to push it far enough so that it clips through this object here too much. So I think I'll make it I'll place it somewhere around there. Now just so it's not too far down, I'm also going to scale it down a little bit. Now you might say, okay, this is not really close to the same thing at all, but it really doesn't matter. This is really not a very visible detail, so I think we can be a little creative with this part. Now I'm going to extrude the edge loop at the bottom of this frame, just so I can get an angle there. I'm going to scale it out, and then I can use that angle as a little bevel, so that the shape here blends a little bit more nicely with the body of the tank. And of course I'm going to add another little bevel on top there. And then using my insert faces tool right there, I'm going to shrink this face in so that I can extrude it in down towards the body of the tank. And then this is going to have like a little, this is going to be the hole where the viewports are going to be placed. Now it doesn't have to be too deep as long as it's visible that there is an indented part there. So in this new indented part that we just made out of the face, we're going to duplicate that face and we're going to shrink it down a little bit. And after we shrink that face down, we're going to cut off the end of it. We're just going to cut off a few vertices in the end there and then fill in the face. And we're going to cut it about there so it has like a sliced part. And we're going to flatten the top and we're going to bring it down a little bit. And then we're going to delete the face in the end here. And once we deleted this face, we can make some bevels on this sharp edge here just so it looks a little bit more natural. And now if we fill this part in, we have the sort of back part behind the 3 little viewports that you can see there. I'm going to add in one plane, and I'm going to use that plane to form one of these 3 little windows. And I'm going to bring this plane up to about the top of this hatch kind of thing, but not just not all the way up to the top, but just so there's a little space between the top of this and the top of the other part. And I'm going to stretch this out, and then I can add just 2 loop cuts in the middle of the shape, right? So that way I have 3 separate little planes. And if I go to individual origins and I just scale all the 3 faces down a little bit on the x-axis, they all become a little bit more narrow, and there's like a little gap between them, right? So now I'm just going to take the ones on the side, and I'm going to turn them a little bit. And then the middle one is going to be pushed forward a little bit, because you can see that they're all facing in a slightly different direction. That's just a trivial fact. I think the driver in this tank has about a 120-degree view angle, or field of view. And yeah, anyway, we have to have these 3 little windows at different angles to increase the view angle there. So I'm also just going to use my 3D cursor real quick to push these edges further to the back, just so they go through and into the hatch. And we're going to pull these 3 edges on top down a little bit. And now if we select all the edges on top here, we can add some bevels to finish this thing off. And now we have the basic shape for this viewport here. So we're going to take the face and the back on this hatch here. We're going to use the insert face tool to add some new faces. And let's take these edges a little bit further to the back as well. And let's separate this into a new object. And now you see we have the rough shape of these little viewports, so we can just go ahead and add in a solidify modifier to add some thickness to them so they look like they should. Let's make sure we turn on even thickness, and let's give them a thickness of about 0.004. And we can go ahead and apply that, and now let's just delete these faces at the bottom here, and we can also do the same thing with the faces in the back. Now I can never get enough bevels, so I'm also going to add a few small bevels to the edges of these viewports here. And also I want to add some windows to the inside of these little viewports, so I'm going to make some new loop cuts on the inside there. And then I'm going to delete the faces behind the loop cut, and then I'll just fill in the inside of the loop cut that I just made, right? And now it's like we have a little window on the inside of the viewport. Let's have a look inside here. You see they're clipping through, but that's not a problem. That's right as it should be. And maybe we can just select this whole edge loop here and these few faces in the front and just drag them down so we don't see this ugly edge sticking out. And then let's just delete that face and we're good to go. And to go along with our smooth shading modifier, I'm going to add in the edge split modifier. And we're going to set this edge split modifier to about 45 or 50 degrees. And now that looks pretty smooth, I think. I'll just parent that to the main body of the tank real quick. Now let's work on another interesting detail at the side of the tank here. I'm going to move over to this part of the side armor, and I'm going to place my 3D cursor there. I'm going to add in a plane. Now I'm going to use this plane to make this here cover that you can see on the side of the tank. I guess it's some kind of container or something, I don't really know, but it's an interesting detail that we're going to add right now. So we can just take this plane, we can stretch it out. We can just make it a little bit longer like that. And this shape is pretty simple. So let's just line it up with our blueprint real quick and extrude it upwards. And after we've done that, we can just take these 4 edges on the sides and we can add some bevels to them. Now the shape is pretty round on top as well, so I'm also going to add a bevel to the top edge. Now this is where things get a little bit more tricky. Now there's probably a simple way to do this, but I chose the hard way. And that's this cross thing in the middle of this panel that you can see there. So what I did is I added a plane, and I shrunk it down, and I tilted it on the z-axis by 45 degrees, right? And then I take the edges on the left and the right of this new square that I have there, or this new little cube, and I push them inwards so that the faces on the side of the cube, right, they're pointed in the angles that I want them to. And then I'm going to use these new faces to extrude the parts of the X that we can see there, right? So if you extrude this face, you can see it goes right towards the corner of this panel that we just made. So we can extrude it out, and it kind of looks like the shape that we need, right? So we're going to do the same thing for all the other faces here. And then we're going to add some loop cuts and take them all the way down to the middle, but we're going to slide the loop cuts back out a little bit. And the reason we're doing this is just to make a little bit more space on the middle of this X. You're going to see in a few minutes here. I'll do the same loop cuts here, and I'll just use the same measurements when I slide them out. So I can just delete these faces on the inside now. And as you can see, I can just connect the edges between them. And then I'm also going to delete these faces on top here, and the ones at the bottom as well, because you can see that there's a pretty ugly vertex arrangement there. So let's get rid of those real quick. And now we can just fill in the face on top, and it looks a little bit more organized at least, and then just a few more loop cuts here, just with the bevel, just so that it looks a little bit more round there. I'm also going to add some bevels to the outside edges here, and then I can just fill that face in at the top and at the bottom as well. And of course we need some more bevels on these edges out here. Now I added some bevels to the bottom here. You can see I have to be careful not to make any clipping. I don't actually need the bevels at the top. I don't know why I did them at the bottom. I think I was trying to do a boolean and then cut in the hole, cut in the shape into the panel, but I decided that the shape should be sticking out instead, so I reversed it on the z-axis and I made the bevel on top, right? So I'm going to delete the faces at the bottom, and I'm going to make the shape a lot thinner, and then I can just pull the whole thing down on top of the panel so you have this X. I think it should look something like this. And I'm going to make the whole panel a little bit thinner by just moving the top edges down a little bit. Now the next detail on this part is this hinge here. So we're just going to go ahead and make a cylinder with about 12 vertices, and we're going to shrink the cylinder all the way down to about the size of this hinge. And we can just rotate it around the x-axis, and then stretch it out on the y-axis a little bit. And if we bring it into place there, we can basically just copy another cylinder like that and make it for use it as the other part of the hinge there. We're going to stretch it out a little bit on the y-axis, and then we're going to delete all the vertices at the bottom half. So we're going to take the two edges that we have left on the sides and extrude them down, so we have a sort of half cylinder which is extruded downwards. And of course some bevels again, and that's pretty much one of our hinges. And then we can just duplicate that to the other side. Well, that just about wraps up this tutorial. In the next one we're going to be focusing on the glorious back part of this tank. For example, some of these panels in the back here, and we're finally going to redo the exhaust system over here. So I hope you stick around to watch the next episode. Like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.